Ex3 ultraClean. We're doing part 3, and now we're going to do the long awaited for pop dots effect, and it's only can be done in 14 easy steps on your sheet, so make sure you download that sheet to follow the steps. It does take a little bit of following along and doing it right because we're using channels here, and sometimes they could be a little tricky. So I'm going to follow it exactly from the sheet so that when you follow it, hopefully it'll help you go through the steps without making any mistakes. And there's different ways to do this. You could do it with a circle, and you could do it with almost the text shape itself. So we'll try it maybe both ways, but I'll start with a circular selection because that's what it says on the sheet. And first of all, I'm going to try to go above my ultraClean layer. It's actually going to go behind it, but I'm going to go to my ultraClean layer, and what I'm going to do is just make a circular marquee. You could go over here, and I'm just going to make a marquee that goes behind it, and you could probably barely see that. And remember, when you move a marquee around after drawing it, don't use your arrow tool, use your marquee tool and grab it somewhere other than the very middle, and I'm just going to put that there, and that's all you need right now. And then I'm going to go to my channels palette. So my channels is over here. I'm going to go to my channels palette, and it says create a new channel. To do that, you could go down here. There's a little button that makes a new channel, and we've done this before with our colorize exercise. So I'm going to create a new channel, and what it is, it's all black to start, and we're going to make it white. We're actually going to do a couple things. So for number 3, what we're going to do, it says the background channel will be black and fill the selection with white. Now to fill with white, we already mentioned how to do that. If you have black and white over here, you can actually do Command Delete, which will fill that, or you could change this to white and do Option Delete, or you can go Edit Fill, whatever, fill and just fill white. So whatever works for you, just make sure your blending is normal 100%. And I'm just going to fill that with white. So you could have used Option Delete, and then it says Deselect. So I'm going to do Command D, which is Deselect. That's just under Select, Deselect, Command D. That's where that comes from. So I just have basically a white circle on a black background right now. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do a Gaussian blur on this channel. This alpha 1 channel that's here. I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go down to Blur and look for Gaussian blur, and I'm just going to blur this thing. So I'm just going to increase it up. I think on the sheet I said go to something like 50 or something, or 40 or 50. It says 40. Maybe I'll try 50, and I'll just hit OK. Now I just have a blurred kind of circle here right now. And then I'm going to go to Image Adjustments. I'm going to go to Image Adjustments, Invert. So Image Adjustments, Invert, and now it looks like a big black blur in the middle. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a color halftone to make this big, to make these like kind of big black like halftone dots. So while I'm still on this channel, I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go down to Pixelate and color halftone. Now I gave you some options on the sheet. As far as the max radius, increase that to somewhere like 24 to 36. Maybe I'll just use 30 because that's kind of splitting the difference. So it'll make bigger dots the higher number you put in here. And we like nice big pop dots. And then it says make all channels 45 because right now it's doing kind of almost like a CMYK kind of pop dot. So I'll just hit Tab and put in 45 to all of these. I'm going to hit OK. Now you can see that they're kind of the dots are what we actually want as the color dot. So if this was a color, this is actually how we want it. But when we use it as a channel, it's actually going to have to be reversed. That's why we kind of did it like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert it again before I go back. So I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, Invert. Okay, so now they're kind of white circles. So that's why we're going to do that. We're going to use the white circles. So we're going to use these white circles, and that's why we want to, almost as if this was a stencil, we want to almost spray paint through these, and we want to make sure they're circles and not reversed. So we're going to go back to our RGB. So I'm going to click on RGB up here. Now you won't see your text anymore. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a new layer. And I don't think I made a layer yet, and I didn't. So I'm going to make a new layer above ultraClean, even though I'm going to move it down, but I'll make a new layer. So I'll create a new blank layer. And it's just called layer 1, and I'll just call it pop dots. And what I'm going to do with pop dots is I'm going to go select load selection, and we did this again for the colorize, and it's saying channel pop dots transparency. Don't be fooled, that's not it. That's saying load anything that's transparent on the pop dots layer. That's not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is alpha 1. That was what the channel name was. So make sure you do that as a new selection. And if you hit OK, you'll see the dots. And if I zoom into here, what I'm looking for is, and the way we did it this way is so the circles are going to be open because we're going to fill all these little circles with color. And that'll make the pop dots effect. And you could do it anything you want. And you could always change this color. It's not a big deal. So let's say you wanted the pop dots just white. I could go over here, make this white, hit OK, and I'll do Option Delete. And there's my pop dots are white. If you didn't want them white, you could go to something else. And, you know, if you wanted them yellow, I'll choose a yellow color. And you could do Option Delete and make them yellow. Now, if you deselect and you're like, oh, now I want to change color. And if you go Option Delete now, let's say you wanted them light blue. I'll go here, I'll just choose a light blue color, and I'll go Option Delete. Oh, it filled the whole layer blue. Well, that's not a big deal. What you can do if you ever want to just fill the pixels that are there on this pop dots layer is just click on this lock transparency. If you click that, it locks the transparency so that you'll only fill where there's pixels. So now if I wanted to do Option Delete, it'll only fill where pixels are, and it'll kind of preserve the transparency. So that's kind of what that does. And remember, you can adjust the opacity. So if you wanted to make this a little like semi-transparent, move it down a little bit, and then you could even move this underneath your other layers. And I want to move it behind both layers. So there's my pop dots, or it's not far enough. It's not under my It's Clean yet. Okay, now it's under my It's Clean. So, and whenever you want to change color, if you want to do it yellow, just give a new foreground color. And I'll do Option Delete, and I'll make it yellow. Now it's it's opaque right now. It's at 77, so maybe I'll just kick it up a little bit. And that's kind of a neat look that kind of gives a real focal point there. Now, one thing I'll mention real quick, I'll go through the steps one more time, and I'll try to do this real quick, but there's 14 steps, so it's never real quick. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go to I'll do another one around the lettering shape. It doesn't have to be a circle. And I'm going to go to the ultraClean outline. If you're not sure you're on it, just click it. There's the ultraClean outline, and I'm going to command click right on it, which will load that as a selection. And remember, just like we did before, you could go to Select, Modify, Expand, and maybe I'll do it like 30 pixels. And there's that selection. And remember what we did before? After we had a selection like the circular one, what we actually did is we went to the Channels palette. So I'll go to Channels palette, make a new selection. Okay, and I'll do the same thing. I'll fill it with white. I'll go Option Delete. I'll fill this with white, and then we can deselect because we don't want to blur anything when it's still selected. So deselect before you do a Gaussian blur. Then I'm going to do a Gaussian blur, and I'll go Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. Maybe I'll do around the same amount. Could do a little bit less, but maybe I'll go down to 40 for this one. And then what we're going to do is invert it so that it's not showing the white. And the reason I want to do this, because if I did Filter, Pixelate, color halftone, I'll just show you this. It's showing the same amount. If I did this, you could see the dots are black, and I don't want. And then when I reverse it again, it'll actually fill color wherever white is. So I don't want to have that. I want it reversed. That's why we have to make sure that we invert it before we actually run the filter on it. So we're going to do Image, Adjustments, Invert, flip it around first, then we'll run the filter, which is Filter, Color Halftone, Pixelate, Color Halftone, and I'll just use the same amount. I'll use the 30, make sure these are all 45, and I'll hit OK. And now these circles are black, but now when I invert it, those circles will be white, and that's what I'm going to want to use. So I'm going to invert it one more time. We invert it twice. But you want to make sure that the circles are white before you go back to your RGB layer. Now if I go back here, you don't see anything because we don't have anything active, and you got to make a new layer. So I'll go to my layers, and I'll make sure I'll just go above my other pop dots. So here's my other pop dots. I'll make it above there. And to make it active, you go Select, Load Selection. And this time it's going to be called Alpha 2. Now you could give it a custom name, but it was just called Alpha 2, and I'll activate it. And then you could just fill it. Now maybe you want to fill this with a blue color. Maybe I'll select this blue color up here, and just get it like a light blue, or you can use an orangey color, you could use white, you could use that. Maybe I'll just use white. I'll use white, and I'll do Option Delete. Now hold it. Before I do Option Delete, what do I have to do? I have to make a new layer. That's number 10 on the sheet. So make sure that you make a new layer so that it's on its own layer and it doesn't affect anything else. So I'll call it I'll call it you know, UT pop dots, so I know it's the pop dots for the text and not the circular one that I did. And I could change those names, like, you know, circular pop dots and ultraClean pop dots. And then I'm going to do Option Delete, and there's my pop dots for that. So I have double pop dots effects. I'll do a Command D. Double pop dots. I have yellow ones in the back. Now you could scale these layers. You could do whatever you want. If you thought that pop dots in the back should be bigger, you could hold Shift, scale it up, and just make it a little bit bigger. You can move it around. They're on their own layer. You could put a drop shadow underneath the other pop dots. Those white pop dots, if you wanted to put a drop shadow on there, you could go to layer style, drop shadow. You know, and you can put a drop shadow behind those dots if you want. You can make them bigger. Make a nice big blur on them, turn down the opacity, you know, just to give more color. You don't even have to use it, you know, you could use a color on here if you want. You could use a glow if you want it on there. So I'll just leave it black for now with a drop shadow, but that's just what I wanted to show right now. This is the pop dots effect. And again, you have to follow those steps. You have to inverse it twice, but it's actually using channels as a little like template to kind of just fill with color. And you could do that with anything. You could make any kind of a selection and turn them into pop dots. And we're using channels because that forces it to be one color. And that's part 3.